Hi, good evening, everybody. COVID-19 has caused an unprecedented global disruption. In India, we've been under lockdown now for over 3 weeks, and while there's enough being said about the economic impact, which all of us are conscious of, but really one institution that has faced severe disruption is our judiciary. Court premises across India were forced to close down pretty much overnight due to the need for implementing social distancing. And there was a concern that our judicial system would really come to a complete standstill. A frightening thought, really, to say the least. But I am pleased to say that our judicial machinery, led by the Supreme Court, has to some extent responded to the crisis quickly and reasonably well. Um, Courts, some of the superior courts and tribunals are employing various technological solutions to continue operations to some extent. E-filings and hearings of urgent cases are being permitted via video conferencing facilities in the Supreme Court and High Court. Uh, Undeniably, there's been a slowdown and routine hearings are not taking place, but the judiciary is still functioning. At least the higher judiciary is still functioning. With virtual courts now in operation across India almost exclusively, we thought there is no better time than now to really revisit the need and possibility of permanent integration of virtual courts in our judicial system. What you see on your screen really are the high courts and tribunals that are using various technologies across the country, but that just really shows that there is some sort of an effort, but of course a lot will need to be done. I'm delighted to have four, now three. Unfortunately, Sharan has not been able to log in. Uh, Senior and eminent members of our legal community as part of the panel today. We have Mr. Janak Dwarkadas, we have Mr. Amit Desai, and we have Dr. Birendra Saraf, all designated senior advocates who have kindly agreed to share their thoughts and really give us the practitioner's perspective. With that, I will start the panel discussion uh, with a question to Janak Bhai. Janak Bhai, do you really believe there is a need for virtual courts in the civil dispute resolution machinery? Do you see that in the wake of COVID-19, a real possibility of integration, adoption of the courts in our judiciary? Your thoughts, Janak Bhai?
Uh, Let me begin by saying hopefully the pandemic which the world is suffering from due to COVID-19 will be overcome sooner or later, and we shall be able to function as we did just before the 15th of March. To meet the requirements of social distancing and the lockdown, the Supreme Court passed an order, as you're aware, under Article 142 on April 7, directing courts to function by adopting measures to hold hearings via video conferencing and calling upon all high courts to formulate a plan for the virtual functioning of the courts within the high court's jurisdiction. This was an exception on account of the lockdown and in order to respond to the call for social distancing which the government had issued. This, according to the Supreme Court, as it said in its order, was not a matter of discretion, but a duty cast upon all of us. It, however, clarified that no court shall record evidence without the mutual consent of both the parties by video conferencing. So, answering this call, which the Supreme Court made, the Bombay High Court, as you are aware, has issued guidelines for the holding of hearings currently only for 2 hours a day in urgent matters by video conferencing via the Zoom app. The question as to whether video conferencing or virtual courts are here to stay is far too complex and important a question, which in my view cannot be answered in a short seminar or webinar of 1 hour. Therefore, what I will attempt to do is only highlight some of the pros and the cons of virtual courts taking the place of open courts in India. Let me begin with the pros. Easier and wider access to court proceedings in courts to the public all over the country. One of the first advantages. Second, reduction in time to file proceedings. as litigants may not be required to travel to courts over long distances. Third, electronic data storage facilities reduces the physical space required for storage of court proceedings, documents, records, and orders of the court. Fourth, easier, faster, and quicker access to documents, records, orders, and proceedings filed in court. 5. Reduction in time and labor in physically transporting the proceedings to and from courts on a daily basis in respect of matters listed on the daily board. 6. In fact, it could even solve the problem of increasing the bench strength of judges and courtrooms required for the judges and administrative staff if physical courthouses are replaced by virtual courts. 7. May bring about greater transparency and accountability if record of court proceedings and orders are available for inspection online and in real time. 8. Reduction in vehicular pollution. 9. Reduction of the burden on public transportation. 10. Will encourage work from home for a greater number of people participating in the field of administration of justice, saving their own commute time. Now, as against these advantages, which I said are only illustrative and not exhaustive, what are the disadvantages? 1. Requires a reliable and an all-India grid and network of data transfer and data storage and data communication network. 2. For which you require a steady, uninterrupted, and reliable source of electricity and supply of power at all times and all over the country. 3. It requires a huge capital expenditure for installation of adequate, sophisticated, and state-of-the-art hardware and software in all courts all over the country. 4. Requires staff and judges to be trained to use this hardware and software, therefore the need for adequate time. 4. Requires litigants to acquire compatible hardware and software and training to use the same. 5. Requires all lawyers, firms, their partners, associates, and staff to acquire and install compatible hardware and software, plus training the staff and partners and associates and staff involved in litigation. 6. Lower courts all over the country conduct proceedings in their regional languages. Therefore, reliable software will have to be developed to translate the record and make it available in English to persons unfamiliar with the local languages. 7. This will apply even to all past proceedings and records of past proceedings which may have already been filed and have not reached the stage of hearing at the respective high court levels. Then all existing proceedings in all courts, all high courts, and the Supreme Court will have to be digitized. 9. Members of the public who wish to witness or attend the virtual court hearings will also have to acquire compatible hardware and software at great expense to themselves, where instead a local bus or train ticket could take them to the courts. 10. Law students and students of the law generally will suffer the same handicap. 11. The object and purpose behind recording evidence of witnesses in open court under the gaze of the public in general will be lost or defeated. And the last, unless the hardware and software is robust and reliable, issues of security and safety of the documents, records, and proceedings will be compromised. Currently, proceedings are being conducted in the Bombay High Court via the Zoom app. We've heard today from the MHA that there are concerns about the security of this app. The Wall Street Journal also reports in the newspapers today that the proprietors of Zoom app itself are looking to correct the discrepancies in their security systems. So this requires therefore attention. It has to be one single software and which is reliable and security safe. Then it also requires, as you know, the current Zoom app, a smartphone or an iPad or laptop which is compatible for the purpose of participating or witnessing the proceedings. Otherwise, as of today, it is not possible for anyone and everyone to participate. In my view, for the present, it is too early for India to consider virtual courts instead of physical courts, given all the reasons or the cons that I have indicated. According to me, the cons far outweigh the pros.
Thank you, Janak Bhai, for that very detailed note. Thank you very much. Amit Bhai, do you feel the same way, and especially in the context of the criminal justice system? I mean, I think we all agree that there is a need, but the challenges, it seems, far outweigh the advantages today.
So, King Shuk and Ketan, thank you for having me on this program today. Undoubtedly an important topic of the day for all of us litigators sitting at home and wondering what the future for litigation is. COVID has actually sharpened the debate and discussion on virtual courts, which has been taking place across the judicial systems of many countries for the last nearly about 25 or 30 years or maybe more. I don't think the question is about technology anymore. The question is the more important and philosophical question of how do you go about achieving it, and what are the pros and cons. I think Janak has, in his inimitable style, very, very thoroughly and meticulously set out the various physical attributes and the pros and cons of the virtual courts. And they're all absolutely bang on. I fully subscribe to all those issues that he has pointed out. And I think the larger question that we need to talk about, and as Janak said, it's not possible to do it in a 1-hour program, is really the question as to what extent can we introduce virtual courts in our system as we speak, and particularly in the criminal justice system. We've seen over the last 30 years in the criminal justice system two very prominent cases which caught the imagination of the people across the planet, which dealt with virtual courts in a sense, open justice system where cameras were allowed inside the courtroom, and which was the O.J. Simpson case and the Oscar Pistorius case of South Africa. And if you go back and look at the jurisprudential material, the jury is still out as to whether these kind of actions are appropriate for a justice system anywhere in the world. So technology is essential to bring about speedy justice, but the question will always be that in which aspects of the justice delivery system should we bring about the use of the technology of video conferencing and computers and digitalization, etc. I think it's easier to bring in the new technology in areas where there are oral arguments, areas where there is issues of case management, but I think it's extremely difficult and complicated to deal with this issue in areas where there is a trial and there are witness actions. Because once you are in a witness box, and that's the element where the subordinate judiciary to a large extent is concerned with, is that what does it do to witnesses? And there's a lot of material to suggest that witnesses are not necessarily sort of open to a free and frank and a truthful communication of the facts when they realize that they're on camera and that they're being sort of beamed across the planet. So it's easier for people to know that whilst we have an open court and an open justice system, and in the courtroom there are 30 or 40 or 50 people are there and we can see their faces, it is a psychological problem for witnesses to be able to deal with the concept of hundreds and thousands of people watching them where they cannot see them, and what is the kind of testimony. So what happens is that there's a debate on whether they are actually going to give evidence of the case or they are playing to the gallery. We've had this debate and discussion even in relation to oral arguments where judges, and it's recorded in several judgments of our courts, is the question as to whether even the judges would be then playing to the virtual courts and to the gallery outside. So these are some very, very concerning areas and issues, but there's no doubt that COVID has sharpened the focus of the need and the crying need for bringing in technology into the court very, very quickly. We can debate the larger issue of open courts. We are experimenting with it, as you know, in India, with the recent decision of the Supreme Court in Swapnil, where they've said, let's try live streaming in Court 1. Of course, it's still not entirely open because they're going to do it in with people sitting in an adjoining courtroom. They're going to experiment with it. But there are balancing that needs to be done. Is if you read the judgment of the 5 judges in Sahara Real Estate, where they dealt with the question of media trials and the need, as Justice Kapadia, who penned that judgment after hearing all the issues and balancing the needs of Article 19 of the freedom of speech of the media and the needs for a presumption of innocence, which is now a human right, and providing for a fair trial, is a concept of postponement of trials, postponement of the recording of the proceedings of a court as a via media to neutralize the impact of a media onto the trials. So these are areas that we are really concerned with, and I must tell you that I mean there's a lot of material out there, but one thing that does seem to be happening, and I think judicial notice has been taken of this fact, is that when there are cases which have got a lot of publicity, they are sensitive cases for society. The continuing media campaign that takes place outside the courtroom does have an impact on the justice delivery mechanism inside the courtroom. And you virtually, in relation to trials, will have 2 courts functioning. One is the courts of law and the courts of the people. And every day, with the way the social media is these days, you will have continuous running commentary of the manner in which the proceedings are taking place in the courtroom, be it a comment on the judge, be it a comment on the litigant, be it a comment on a witness, be it a comment on the lawyers who are in that court arguing a matter. So whilst it's important and imperative to bring in technology into the courts, the question is, do you need to have virtual courts? And that is a debate that needs to be really, I don't know whether there's an answer to it. Most countries, even in India, we're already moving towards introducing video conferencing into the courtroom. The question is only in which type of matters do you use this technology, and do you open up the courts so that everybody and anybody can actually step in and deal with the matters in the court. So, I mean, let me tell you, Kinshuk, this conversation can go on. And the thing is, I think the real issue will be that I don't think that the debate about virtual courts, I think the debate should only be what are the exceptions to the virtual courtroom. And that's the only issue that needs to be really discussed and debated today. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit Bhai. I think some excellent points there. And really, I think all of us agree that there is no scope for virtual courts replacing the existing system permanently or entirely. But possibly there is some scope for supplementing or complementing the existing system. With that, Dr. Saraf, can we have your thoughts, please, on this? And in fact, you've recently appeared in a matter before the Bombay High Court. So it would be nice to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Kinshuk, and thank you for inviting me. I did have the privilege recently of doing a matter online, a virtual court, which went on for almost 2 hours. And I must say that it was an excellent experience. Not for a moment did I feel that I was not in a courtroom. It was a lovely experience. And I was most surprised to see our senior, Mr. Virag Tulsapurkar, who till recently was averse to a mobile phone, operating so seamlessly on a computer and a virtual court. And we argued against one another for almost 2 hours, and the matter went on so well. But having said that, uh, there are a whole lot of practical difficulties, which when I say practical difficulties, I don't mean that they cannot be overcome. All I mean is that there is right now a great deal of euphoria. Suddenly we feel that we have reached a situation where almost after the COVID-19 situation ends, we will all be arguing cases in a virtual court and the whole scenario in India will change. But we need to be a little more realistic about the manner in which our courts function, the manner in which our system is, and also the ground realities of our legal practice in India. We need to be cognizant that the practice of law is not restricted only to the metropolitan cities of Delhi, Bombay, or other big cities, maybe where the principal bench of a high court is situated. The different nature of lawyers, and I must confess that the kind of difficulties faced by lawyers, we all heard about it, we all knew it a bit, but I realized it recently when the Bombay Bar Association invited applications for assistance to lawyers during this situation, and then I realized what a situation in which lawyers are, but they are an integral part of the legal practice, and they are a part of the system. So when we think of introducing virtual courts on a large scale, there will be various difficulties starting from something as basic as connectivity of internet. Today, without internet, there cannot be a proper virtual court. Now, how are you going to monitor the connectivity, internet connectivity on the lawyer's side? How are you going to ensure that the lawyer has a good connectivity? What happens in a situation where the audio video situation of the lawyer is not working properly? Today, we have had a difficulty getting Mr. Jagtiani on board for a panel discussion. What happens if this happens in the midst of a hearing in court? In the midst of a hearing, the lawyer suddenly goes offline and thereafter is unable to log in. And we must be, conscious that there are very few. If you take a percentage in India, then I think almost 72% of India's population doesn't have an internet connection. A large number of them operate only on 4Gs on their phone. And imagine all the lawyers trying to log in into a virtual court through a 4G connection on a telephone. It is a practical difficulty which is there. As I said, when I point out the practical difficulty, my idea is not to rain on the parade of everybody, of thinking that yes, we are moving towards technology and within 6 months we'll operate like America, England, and Singapore. But that these are things which will require a settling down, require a solution, and before we can make virtual courts a reality at a larger scale, till that time we'll have to continue working on resolving the issues that we face on a day-to-day basis. It will have to start on a small scale, on an experiment basis, and thereafter it has to be developed. Now, also a situation, it will require a great deal of active participation of the government and a lot of funding from the government. It is not a very easy task. Today, the Bombay High Court has been struggling to get a premises or a land for building a Bombay High Court building for several years, and which has not been getting done very easily. So that is a situation which will have to be worked upon, the kind of equipments required, the kind of training required, the kind of infrastructure required. If we need to have a virtual court facility, we'll have to have that facility in almost every judge's courtroom so that the judge has the privilege of hearing some matters as a virtual court whenever he likes. So that will require involvement of the government, the participation of the government. Then the training of the judges, the training of staff, and most essentially, the training of lawyers. Now, what happens? Today I'm addressing a group of people who must be very techno savvy and who are the privileged lawyers of this country having the best possible infrastructure facilities. You will make an e-filing, but the other side engages a lawyer who says, I don't even have a computer. So it becomes a situation where either you say that the defendant should not have the privilege of engaging that lawyer, or immediately you'll have to work out some other mechanism. Then you'll have to have a situation whereby you can address from your office and the other lawyer goes to court. Most of the people won't like a situation where you are in a virtual court and the other side is addressing in physical appearance. So these are all nuances which will have to be worked out over a period of time. Secondly, e-filing. We have to start a virtual court over a period of time with the process of e-filing. Now, e-filing was really introduced in Bombay in 2010. I don't know how many lawyers have ever taken advantage of e-filing. Now, also a situation that today when we appear before a learned judge, one of the most difficult situation is the organization of the papers of the judge himself, though it is in a physical format. Most of the judges say there is no running pagination. Now, how does it work? Tomorrow you will have an e-filing situation. There are 7 defendants, each one of them filing an affidavit. They must get that pleadings paginated. This is all a situation which will, these are practical difficulties which will require a great deal of training of every lawyer who makes an appearance in that matter. And that will require some patience, some time, and a great deal of cooperation from all concerned. Also, Kingshuk, the problem is that it will require a great deal of mindset change on the part of judges, on the part of lawyers. Litigants, I'm sure, will be able to change their mind very easily, but it will require a great deal of mindset change on the part of judges and also on the part of lawyers. I remember seeing some few years back, huge tablets coming in courtrooms, which used to be kept on the judge's dais to, try and encourage e-courts. They stayed there for a few minutes, a few days, but thereafter they were never used because lawyers were not in a position to assist the court. The court did not have the time to get trained, and you'll have to have a situation where the judges also will have to undergo rigorous training, and with the kind of pressure of work, you'll have to give judges virtually an off for some time to get fully trained. So these are, as I said, I'm not trying to be a person who's a pessimistic person in this. Virtual courts are the need of the day. We need to work on it. Right now it has gathered steam, and I'm sure if we continue pursuing it, we'll be able to achieve it. But my request to each one of them, each one of the young lawyers particularly, is that we need to be patient, we need to be cooperative, and we need to give it some time to happen. And to end on a lighter note, one of the very big practical difficulties for counsel appearing in matters will be they will have to be better prepared. There'll be nobody prompting them with page numbers, there'll be nobody prompting them with anything. So they will have to have all their notes ready, they'll have to be fully prepared, because once they are on screen, they are on their own. So these are all issues. It will require a mindset change, but otherwise, this is something which has changed the entire stage of the legal profession, and that is how it's going to work. So we need to be prepared for it. Only thing is a matter of time.
Thank you, Biren. Thank you for that. You've, I think, summarized along with Janak Bhai and Amit Bhai some of the practical challenges, and really some challenges are at least now seem insurmountable, so to say. But just to touch upon some of the legal issues, and I'm happy to say that Sharan is back online, and that's fantastic. Sharan, do you want to share your thoughts and maybe just touch upon some of the legal issues that you foresee apart from the practical ones?
Okay, great. So this is like coming in the middle of a matter. So I guess that's something we're all used to.
Not possible in a virtual court, though.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Kinshuk, to come back to the question that you raised, which is some of the legal challenges, let me briefly address that issue, and then with your permission to come back to one or two of the more general aspects which some of the other panelists have touched upon. But let me come to the legal issues over here, and the issues that we would, as a legal community, have to face and address if you want to make virtual courts a more permanent feature in the justice delivery system. And I think that the legal issues, if you want to make it a permanent feature in the justice delivery system, would perhaps be different from the situation which you are presently facing, where because of the pandemic, virtual courts are perhaps the only way in which you can conduct a court. And if that's the only way in which the justice system can work in this emergent or exigent situation, then it is by its very definition an exception to the well-known rule of all hearings having to be public. And the pandemic situation is an exception to that rule, because of which we could perhaps justify the hearing of certain cases through virtual courts and virtual platforms without public access in this present pandemic public health emergency. But the minute you look at virtual courts as a permanent feature or a permanent fixture, then that requires you to address yourself to various provisions of the law, and I'll just state a few of them, which clearly mandate that in our system of justice, it is an essential feature or an essential component of justice that it must be open and transparent. And by that, it's not just open in the metaphorical sense, but also open in the physical sense. So for example, section 327 of the CRPC says that every place in which a criminal case is heard is deemed to be a court. Every public place, that is deemed to be a court. And the CRPC mandates that the public must have access to the extent to which they can be conveniently contained in that physical space. There is a similar provision in 153B of the CPC. In fact, in the CRPC, there is also a provision, both CRPC and CPC also contain provisions for the exception, but that is clearly an exception, namely that where the administration of justice requires, a particular judge can at his discretion for certain sensitive matters treat a hearing as an in-camera hearing. But that is clearly an exception to the rule that courts must be open and the public must have access. Now, keeping this rule and this exception in mind, how would the virtual court system work in a post-pandemic situation where you can't fall back on the pandemic as a general circumstance to invoke the exception? And I think that is really an important question to be addressed. And according to me, one question that the lawmakers and the decision makers will have to apply their minds to is, post-pandemic, if you're going to have any hearings through virtual court, how is the public going to get access to those hearings? Now, along with this comes a related and important question, which is that if you lean towards hearings that are by their virtual definition or by their virtual restriction akin to in-camera hearings, if they are in camera because the public does not have dial-in, does not have virtual access, then the CRPC in 327(3) says that if it's an in-camera hearing, then there is a rule that you will not be allowed to publish or report the proceedings of an in-camera hearing. So if you define virtual courts to be in-camera by definition, then it comes with a greater question of greater significance, which is what about reporting? What about carrying that? What about dissemination of information of all of those hearings? 153B of the CPC does not come with a similar mandate of in-camera and therefore necessarily no reporting. But the Supreme Court in a 9-judge bench in Naresh Sridhar's case way back in 1966 had occasion to go into this question, and it categorically said, the majority decision as well and the minority decision on this issue, that the rule is that all hearings and all court proceedings must be open to the public, and that is an important component of transparency and fairness in the justice delivery system. That in-camera hearings are clearly an exception, they must be specifically warranted. And in fact, the Supreme Court goes a step further. It goes back to the law, the common law in Scott versus Scott, and the Supreme Court says that it is not for the judge in his individual discretion to say this matter is sensitive and therefore in camera. The determination of what should be treated as in camera is itself something which must be based on a defined principle. It can't be ad hoc, it can't be chancellor's foot. So keeping the statutory provisions as they exist now, keeping the much larger notions of fairness and transparency in mind as recognized by the Supreme Court in Naresh Sridhar, as also recognized by the Supreme Court in a more recent decision in Indira Jaising versus Secretary General, that of course, as many of you will know, dealt not with virtual courts but taking transparency to another level of live streaming court proceedings. So let me make that clear. You have a physical court with public access, but you now want to make court proceedings that much more transparent, especially when the issues are seminal or of public importance, and you live stream court proceedings. And in the context of that debate of live streaming to a much larger audience, the Supreme Court once again went into the question of the need for transparency and in camera on sensitive proceedings being an exception to the rule. So when you ask about legal provisions, according to me, if virtual courts are going to be made a permanent fixture, even for some types of hearings, if not all, and even for non-contentious hearings, I think that if you want to immunize that process from any serious legal debate or challenge, you will have to think of perhaps an amendment to the very foundation of the legislative framework of how courts function. Again, a short digression, even when it comes to recording of evidence, under the CRPC and under Order 18, Rule 4 of the CPC, there is a mandate that it must be done in open court. So one would have to think of an amendment. Again, these amendments would perhaps have to be done by the central legislature, because under Schedule 7 of the Constitution, Entry 77 and Entry 78 in List 1 state that the organization of courts, that's the constitution of organization of courts, is something which is within the central list. And for subordinate courts, it is now by virtue of a constitutional amendment within the concurrent list under Entry 11A. So I think if you're going to make it a permanent feature, there is definitely a case, I think a very serious consideration of a statutory amendment to the concerned statutes. And again, on the larger point, I just want to add very briefly to what Biren said, which is that I think that we are overestimating the issue of connectivity and access to the internet and to virtual platforms. One survey says that only 40% of India has connectivity to the internet, and that doesn't mean proprietary connections, it means connectivity through even public connections. And the reason why that is important to know, in absolute terms, it's a high number because you have a large population. But just to put it into perspective, in relative terms, a country like Thailand has 88%. And then when you get to the richer and more developed Asian countries like Japan and South Korea, they have close to 95%. So I think that unless you address that issue, making virtual courts a permanent feature, which is of course desirable in my opinion, in a limited sense, at least to start with, is a non-starter unless you ramp up virtual infrastructure.
Thank you, Sharan. Undoubtedly, way too many legal issues. Biren, do you want to add to that? Do you have anything to say in addition to that?
Sharan has covered most parts of it. Only to say that when the CPC and CRPC spoke of an open court, they didn't have in mind something like the whole world sitting at one time and watching the proceedings. Today, when we have a concept of open court, you really have a situation where a person can go to the court, or a person who's waiting in court who can hear it. Today, when we argue matters, who are the people usually in court? Mostly there are people who are around waiting for their own matters, or some people who otherwise have come to hear matters. But it's a different burden and a different situation on the entire system, and particularly our system. And when I say, as I said, we have to be conscious about the manner in which our system operates, where just about every matter, the whole world is watching, the whole world is seeing it on a virtual platform. And then, as Amit Bhai rightly said, that in the times of social media and this kind of Twitter and everything, in 2 minutes, every person sitting and commenting on every submission being made, every observation of the judge, the Supreme Court has till now not taken a decision on live streaming of cases. Until that is done, virtual courts being made accessible to everyone is as good as a live streaming. So this is a larger issue which needs to be worked out before we can think of a virtual court with access to everyone. That's my only additional comment to what Sharan said.
Janak Bhai, Amit Bhai, we understand the practical challenges, legal challenges, but how do we get over this? Do you think this is something that we can overcome? You've been around for a long time, and do you see is there a possibility? We'll start with you, Janak Bhai.
There is a bit of a disconnect over here. There are three things, three different speakers on the panel have raised. One is Amit, who has talked about a parallel court. One is Biren, who has talked about live streaming, and Sharan, who has talked about legal issues. I think these three things fall within three separate and independent compartments. The problem of parallel courts is independent of whether you have a virtual court or you have a physical court, because that's happening even at this point of time when we are in the physical court realm. So that's a matter of discipline. It's a matter of journalistic discipline. Those are other issues which I don't want to get into at the moment. I don't think whether you have a virtual court or a physical court, the journalists are going to behave themselves, because they have to broadcast news on a 24/7 basis. And as we all know, sensationalism sells more than real news. So that's another problem by itself. As far as the comment which was made about live streaming and comparing live streaming with virtual courts, which Biren tried to emphasize, I would beg to differ on that, because live streaming means the streaming of a live proceeding held in an open court, where you actually make the proceeding in an open court available to people who may not be able to attend the hearing. But that's not the same thing as a virtual court. The two are very different, because in the case of a virtual court, neither the judge, nor the lawyers, nor the litigant, nor the members of the public assemble at one and the same place. Why is this important? This is important because way back in 1964, when there was no 153B in the Civil Procedure Code, and there was no statutory provision for the purpose of holding trials in open court, the Supreme Court had to consider what was meant by trial in open court in the case of Mirajkar, who was a journalist who filed an Article 32 petition right in the Supreme Court to say that in the KMD Thakkersi case, which was a case of defamation filed by KMD Thakkersi against Karanjia, the editor of Blitz, a witness had been called. He gave evidence. Then he backed out on everything he had said. Later, the editor of Blitz discovered that, in fact, this man had made contradictory statements to the income tax authorities with regard to certain monies which he had received. So he was recalled. And when he was recalled, he applied to the court and he said that, look, the evidence that I may give may prejudice me. Therefore, please record it in camera. The judge, the trial court in Bombay, agreed, and his evidence was recorded in camera. The journalist went to the Supreme Court under Article 32, and it is in that case for the first time that the Supreme Court had to consider, by applying general law and the English common law, as to what is meant by trial in open court. And it is pursuant to that decision, and because of the language of 327 in the CRPC, which Sharan has already referred to, that in 1976, the Civil Procedure Code was amended and 153 capital B was introduced. Now, it is interesting that 153 capital B is actually a deeming provision. It is not a provision which says that trials shall be conducted in open court. It is the other way around. The provision actually says the place in which any civil court is held for the purpose of trying any suit shall be deemed to be an open court to which the public generally may have access, as can be conveniently contained in the court, because there is a physical space requirement. But the important words are that it's a deeming provision. It is not a mandate. It is not a direction. This is based on what is meant by an open court trial. Now here, what is interesting, and that is where I slightly digress from my co-panelists, is this. And the fact that you have a court and you have live streaming cannot be an answer. The answer is the fact that every member of the public who wishes to attend, whether he actually attends or not is not the test. Any member of the public, a general public who wants to attend a hearing of a trial, which is a civil trial and which under the proviso to 153B has not been held judicially to be in camera, he should be able to have access. He should be able to walk into that court and say, I desire to hear this, and nobody can stop him. No journalist can be stopped, no member of the public can be stopped. The fact that you widen the screen and make it from 8 mm to 70 mm and give it live streaming and let others who are not in the physical court also view it doesn't mean that you can prevent people from accessing courts generally by reason of the fact, simple fact, A, he has a Nokia phone. He doesn't have a smartphone. He does not have a 5G connection or a 4G connection. He doesn't have an app. He does not have electricity for 8 hours a day. He does not have hardware and software which is expensive to download. These are the problems which really, if you ask me, legislation alone can cure. And that can be cured only when you are able to provide access to the extent, as Sharan mentioned, 95%, almost 85, 95%, where public need not have to travel. It's a choice. Today, a member of the public doesn't, every member doesn't have to go to court to listen to a hearing, but he has a choice to go. Now, he may not exercise that choice if he has 95% of them have connectivity. Then he can't complain that it's not falling within the deeming provision of 153B, because he can attend the hearing if he so desires by merely switching on his phone or laptop or whatever it may be. But till we reach that level of connectivity, and there again, differing with my friend Amit, who I'm extremely fond of, but I would like to correct him if I may in that sense. It is a technology problem and nothing else but a technology problem today. Because unless you have technology that can reach 95% of the public who are able to switch it on at will to hear a open trial, I don't think we'll be able to actually comply with 153 capital B of the CPC. So that's my view. Of course, we'll have to debate this on a much larger platform at some other stage, but we've had very limited time. So I thought I must share my views on this.
So Janak bhai, only once.
Thank you, Janak bhai.
Sorry, Kingshuk, can I just take a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Is this
sure.
then not once a virtual court happens? And the point which I was trying to make was, once a virtual court happens, it is equivalent to a live streaming. A virtual court with access to everyone is
that's
equivalent
the point,
in
to everyone.
In effect, it's a live streaming that anyone who wants to sit from his house can sit and see it. Until the Supreme Court takes a decision on live streaming as a legal issue, the virtual court is effectively rendering the virtual court with access to everyone is rendering the issue before the Supreme Court of live streaming academic. So all I meant was that we need to take a policy call. The Supreme Court needs to take a policy call on live streaming, and thereafter virtual courts with access to everyone can be made a reality. So that's an interlinked question somewhere or the other, I felt.
Okay, may I just add?
Sorry, Janak, go ahead.
A live streaming is one step above physical court. I hope I'm making my point. It's like you have a physical court in which you can contain the number of people who can attend by reason of the space, constraint of space. But you want to make that important public hearing available to a much larger audience. Like when you have lectures in your Bombay Bar Association, which can only accommodate 200, and you put mics outside or you put a screen in some other court because you want others also to see the swearing in of a judge and witness the swearing in, because they can't attend the central court because it is too packed on a particular day, then that is what is called live streaming. But the fact is, those who took the trouble of getting there early were able to enter the central court.
No, I'm not
But
against
if you,
that, sir.
that's the
I'm
point.
not against that. All I'm saying is a virtual court with live streaming, with access to everyone, will be akin to a live streaming. Also, it will also have an effect of live streaming. So that issue also needs to be resolved. That's all I meant. I'm not saying.
Can I just come in there?
So Kingshuk, if I
Sorry,
may just
sorry.
jump in here.
Obviously- Yes, Amit bhai, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I was misunderstood, but I think the question of virtual courts is the debate is not about open courts. I think that we are too far down the road after the last several centuries that we have accepted the principle of open courts. I don't think that's a matter of some debate. We could probably have carved out exceptions if we need to make virtual courts actually workable. But I think the principle of open courts is very, very well established now. I think the question is that where the traditional form of open courts were in court buildings, and therefore there was limited space that was available in those buildings. And as we have evolved over the last many decades, is that technology has allowed the possibility of streaming to a larger number of people who have the access to the courts. But one of the fundamental questions, despite everything, and that is where I have a slightly different view on this, is if you look at the debate at the philosophical level amongst judges across the world, and there are many reports which have come out on this issue, including if you look at the discussion in the judgments of our own Supreme Court when they've debated and discussed these aspects of the matter, there is the concern that whilst you want to balance the needs of access to justice, you need to bring about the need for greater transparency, you need to bring about the need for greater amount of knowledge, education, etc. And therefore, you want to allow a larger number of people into the court process. The question that is always bothering the system, the justice delivery system, is the impact of this on the justice delivery itself. And the impact of this on the justice delivery is about how, in case of trials, witnesses are distracted. I mean, I can just read out a small excerpt from a report that was prepared at the behest of the Australian judges, and it's a Queensland commission, when it dealt with the question as to how do we allow these kind of virtual courts to come in. And one of the observations, if I may just say, is that the experience of the Human Rights Review Tribunal is that most witnesses find giving evidence nerve-wracking, and the presence of a camera can be a dangerous distraction. Dangerous is that ability to concentrate on the question being asked, and on the accurate recollection of events can be jeopardized. In addition, the giving of evidence is for most witnesses a very personal affair. The discomfort of being photographed or filmed while giving evidence and the later publication of those images is seen as a serious invasion of privacy. Taking these interests into account is not inconsistent with open justice. So that is the reason why I said that you have to be clear that whilst you deal with the concept of open justice, and virtual courts is essentially bringing the entire world into that courtroom, because you are now going to give a feed to anybody and everybody who can come in, whoever has an internet connection, whoever has a laptop, can walk into that courtroom sitting far away, thousands of miles away. But what does it do to the justice system itself? Because the persons in the courtroom become conscious of the fact that they are now being watched by hundreds and thousands. And it is that consciousness which has the ability to impact the justice delivery system. So where is the question of the balance between ensuring that we are all very pragmatic in a commercial city like Bombay, where we want to get the job done, so to speak, and say that, okay, we need to finish our matters and get on. And therefore, virtual courts are very efficient in bringing in the technology, file a written submission, finish your argument and go home. But what does it do to the justice system? And that is a debate. In fact, it's been going on for 40 years and nobody has an answer. That's why when I mentioned that you look at the case of O.J. Simpson, 25 years ago, it was the first, one of the most sort of sensational cases that were televised in America. And there is a debate that still continues. That was that the correct decision to televise that particular trial? Did it impact the justice delivery system because it resulted in acquittal? You look at the case in South Africa. There's a whole body of literature. So whilst there is a body of the constitutional experts who say that yes, open justice, and these are two illustrations which actually go to show that the courts of those countries have evolved. But I personally have a view that when you deal with the normal cases where there are trial actions, and take the case of Mirajkar, where the witness himself was concerned. He came in, why? Because he said that the world, his reputation in the world will be besmirched, because if he now gives evidence which is inconsistent with what he has said earlier, then the people outside in society will brand him as a liar. So that was the reason why he went in for an in-camera hearing. So you have to balance off this need. So streaming, which as Biren said, is really a virtual court, is a streaming. It is a live streaming. All that you've done is you've allowed a much larger set of people who have access to an internet connection to walk into a courtroom, which is the virtual courtroom. But what about the people who are in the courtroom? I'm telling you, we've all seen it. All of us have argued in courts in Bombay, where very often our arguments are not properly recorded by the media. They are litigants. They are people who are if you're representing the accused, I can tell you this, that you should see the way in which some of the arguments are recorded, the slant that is given. Do we have an adequate ability to actually deal with the people's court? And we have seen this over the last 15, 20 years as to what is happening in the people's court and how it impacts the justice system. It is for this very reason that the Constitution bench had to come in, deal with the question of fair trial, deal with the question of media trial, and then talk about the postponement after the hearing is over, in order that it doesn't impact the justice delivery system. But if you have, and we can see, all of us have seen it, we are aware of cases in our Bombay High Court where sensitive matters, so the social media has criticized and made some very serious allegations against judges as the matters were progressing, as the arguments were being heard, serious allegations being made against the lawyers. If all of us are to become very conscious about what is being said in the social media, and that's the real impact. It is a reality because we all live in society. We walk out at that courtroom and we are being told that, oh, is this what you argued? How absurd it is, how silly it is. You know, all kinds of things, because the lay public doesn't understand the nuance of the argument. It impacts the process by which we as professionals will be able to deliver. A witness steps in a witness box, gives evidence, is now being recognized on the streets. Everybody will walk up to that witness. There are a lot of people who want their privacy. They say we came and gave this testimony in privacy, not because we want to be recognized on the streets and being told a thing or two. There are cases of commercial secrets where trials are held on matters which are of commercial secrets. And in the course of that evidence, a witness may go out and have to necessarily narrate some aspects of the commercial secrets. It's confidential. Are we going to get a order for postponement merely because it's commercial? I think from all our experience in the courts, I think it's extremely difficult to get an order in a matter where there's a commercial secret and a trade secret, that you'll get an order for an injunction for postponement. You deal with, take for example, official secrets. We deal with criminal trials under the Official Secrets Act. They are open courtrooms. Now, you can then say that, sorry, you can dive in, and then when the official secret is actually being tendered as evidence, that should be an in-camera proceeding. Now, that is the reason why, as I was trying to, my perspective was, I don't think that there is a debate on open justice. I think the debate is on the exceptions, and the question is that which are the matters, because ultimately, if you look at the principle of open justice was actually introduced, as philosophers and jurists talked about, was as a part of the democratic process. And if you live in a democracy, every participant in the democratic process has a right to know what's happening. And it is for that purpose that you had the process of open justice. You may not have it in communist states. So if we are part of the rule of law, then the question is of where do you bring the balance? We are not running away from that. But can we then bring about some balance where in certain type of cases, this may require legislation. Like for instance, let me put it this way. Routine litigations in a civil court, which are only between the parties. It's a list between the parties. I think the public at large is not really interested in it. Very small number of people are interested. Should those commercial disputes be dealt with in virtual courts because you're not impinging upon the democratic process. But if it's a constitutional question, take for example Sabrimala, you will have a running commentary from every seer in this country on a minute-to-minute basis of the arguments that have been canvassed, and any question that the judge asks will be a subject of a comment across the length and breadth of India. So what does it do to the decision-making process? You take Ayodhya. It's all right that it happened in that courtroom, but if it was to be actually streamed live, you would have tweets every minute about everything that was being said to say this so-and-so said it is right, so-and-so said it is wrong. What the judges have said is wrong. So how do you balance the needs to make sure that the justice delivery system works? So private disputes, maybe you don't need an open court system. Like, take for example, in criminal cases, you have a private complaint process under the CRPC, which essentially is in relation to private disputes, although the theory of criminal law is that every crime is a crime against society. But having introduced under our law this concept of private complaints, can we say that those type of cases can be possibly dealt with as part of virtual courts? Maybe we can say that cases which are not as serious, so which are punishable like summons cases or summary cases, which are not as serious, maybe we should say that those can be dealt with as virtual courts, but exclude this mass of public which will come in to those courtrooms and shut the doors on some of them so that your witnesses are not afraid. You may have some cases of terrorism, and that's where it is a very serious matter where witnesses are very scared of giving testimony in such kind of cases. You might want to say that no, we will discount and disregard the open justice system in these cases. So the question which Janak is really what I'm trying to sort of bring about here is the question of the exception to the rule and not giving up the rule, because rule is open justice. But we have to find out those exceptions as to where you can actually bring it into a virtual courtroom, but exclude this entire large mass of public which actually come in to these courtrooms, because you're otherwise on that principle of open justice, you will give anybody and everybody a link into that courtroom. This is really the aspect which I think is a very, very complicated issue, very complex, and I don't know how we're going to be able to resolve it, but needs legislative change after a full detailed analysis of this.
Amit bhai, I think we all agree with you, and really the point that we are all, I think, making is pretty much the same, and the challenges. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so we'll quickly wrap up with a couple of last questions. Just keeping virtual courts aside for a minute, I think all of us would agree that over the past 20, 30 years, we have seen technological progress. We have seen technology being introduced into the judicial system. It's been slow, but it's been steady. I don't know if you would disagree with that. Biren, some quick thoughts on that?
Certainly, we have moved a long way from where we were, and surely I fully agree with you that the pace needs to be faster. When I joined practice, I remember that the daily cause list used to be put up on the notice board every evening, and the law clerks of every firm used to go and physically run through every item on that daily cause list of every judge to identify which is that advocate's matter. And thereafter, he used to call up the advocate and inform him what are the matters for tomorrow. He used to come to know of it. Today, we have a situation that we get a weekly board, and on every week, on Saturday, you know all your matters which are there in the coming week with serial numbers, judge number, judge, and everything. You get today intimations on SMS about your matters. You get today all the objections to your filings by way of emails, SMSs. Today I as an intern in a law firm, to get an order which was passed by a judge was such a huge exercise. We used to keep going to court, asking the stenographer, then trying to get a certified authentic copy. Today, with a click of a button, not only of the high courts, of all subordinate courts, also orders are accessible. So, we are going, judgments, everything is available. There is e-filing available. The entire life of lawyers have changed. The research mechanism. When I was an intern in a law firm, to send a floppy disk, and computers had just about come in, the floppy disk was like a piece of paper. The packaging that was required to send a floppy disk to Delhi was required thermocol, and I don't know all that to save that floppy disk from going to Delhi. And today we have reached a situation of a click of button, everything happening. Almost virtual offices are on the web. So we have come a long, long way. But you're right that the pace can be faster. and we need to work on it. I hope this present situation has given the right jerk and incentive to, keep improving upon our technological needs.
Right. Sharan, your thoughts on this, but really more in the context of maybe our alternate dispute resolution mechanism, say like the arbitration proceedings in India. Do you see more a need to enhance use of technology in arbitrations in India? I mean, surely the challenges can't be as much as they are with civil
Yeah.
proceedings.
Sure, Kinshuk. The short answer to your question is yes. And I think that the functioning of ad hoc arbitrations in India can, in this respect, be guided by what international arbitral institutions are doing. In fact, take, for example, the present global crisis that we are in. International arbitral institutions have, across the board, be it ICC, LCIA, SIAC, have all come out and essentially said that if arbitrations are going to really prove their worth as an alternative to conventional litigation, then this is the time when arbitrations and arbitral institutions should step up. And they've essentially said, and it's a clarion call to all arbitrations and arbitrators and tribunals, that this pandemic cannot be a justification for delay. Before I come back to the specifics of your answer, just for everyone's information, I just wanted to point out that there is in fact a protocol that was issued, a statement that was issued by all the arbitral institutions, I think a few days ago. And there was a specific protocol issued by the International Commercial Arbitration Court that functions under the aegis of the ICC on 9th April 2020, where they have said that these are, according to us, the best practices for the use of technology in arbitrations. They have in fact included a checklist. So for anyone who is interested, that checklist is a good guiding light for what to implement in ad hoc arbitrations from a technological standpoint, and it covers even aspects such as confidentiality, data privacy, what technological standards are necessary for arbitrations on virtual platforms. But I think that they've gone a step further and they've made some interesting suggestions which would be practical for ad hoc arbitrations. What they've said in their 9th April protocol or guidance note is that in every arbitration, there are bound to be issues which are less fact intensive and which are less witness oriented, questions of law or questions based on admitted documents. And they have said that perhaps this is a time when there are restrictions on movement, where arbitrators should sit and have management hearings with the lawyers. And I think that courts can do this too. It's not just ad hoc arbitrations, but courts can do this too. That if you're going to do a virtual platform, identify those segments of a case which lend themselves to a partial award. Now, as we know, partial awards are recognized under our Arbitration Act and every Arbitration Act. They're recognized even under the CPC in the form of preliminary judgments. And identify those arbitration hearings which are amenable to partial awards and use virtual platforms because it can be efficiently deployed to hearings which are not fact intensive and not very document intensive, where there aren't too many questions of inspection and discovery of documents. And they've essentially said that in their protocol, this is something that you should do to utilize this time when there are restrictions on movement. That's certainly something that we can apply in ad hoc arbitrations. There's another point I want to make over here. Almost every international institution in their arbitral rules says that virtual hearings or digital hearings can be decided by the party or be determined by an arbitrator, which basically means that an arbitrator is not dependent upon consent of parties for having a virtual hearing. It is a matter of procedure or a modality which the arbitrator can unilaterally decide. So parties, provided they have access and the natural justice component is suitably taken care of, parties are bound by a decision on a virtual, on proceeding in a virtual manner by an arbitrator. And I think 19.2, section 19, subsection 2 of our Arbitration Act carries essentially the same mandate, which is that if the procedure is not decided by the parties, it is for the arbitrator to decide it. And a virtual hearing would meet the requirements of an oral hearing. And of course, because it's an arbitration, you don't have the same vexed questions of open to the public, because these are proceedings which by nature and by definition are intended to be private and confidential. So the larger debate that we were just hearing on this platform would not apply to arbitration. So I definitely feel, and Of course, there's a need for technology in arbitrations. The ad hoc arbitrations were meant to be cheap and efficient. Today, there's no reason for parties and for arbitrators to fly within the country for short hearings and for hearings which are procedural in nature. That's clearly something which requires a mindset change. We routinely do it for international arbitrations. Why should you be burdened with the cost of Mumbai-Delhi flights and Mumbai-Bangalore flights, which are, I mean, at least before the airline industry crashed, were as expensive as international flights? Why should there be that kind of cost burden? It defeats the purpose of arbitration.
Thank you, Sharan. And Sharan, I think you made a valid point that some elements of this could perhaps also be used in civil proceedings or even criminal proceedings for that matter. And really, the question is that do we need to start small? Because I think the discussion around virtual courts ends up being a discussion which almost seems to suggest that look, we are replacing the court system, but perhaps we need to start small. Janak bhai, do you think that that's going to help? We start small.
Sorry,
Summary
it can be
judgment.
done. It can be done. Even say, for instance, you could start off at the stage of appeals, where the record is already complete. First appeal, second appeal, where the record is complete. There's no evidence required. The pleadings are complete. The matter may not may only require some final arguments to be made. You can easily use or start there, because that is an area where presence of clients may not be required. First appeal, second appeal are only questions of law in any event. So maybe you could start there and then try to see whether how well it's working or not working. Because as Amit rightly said, there are matters where a commercial dispute is there, or a dispute between family members or private parties are there, which have nothing to do with the public at large, the general public. They may not even be interested. So those matters, according to me, if we were to start there, you could probably be able to strike some kind of a balance. I don't know whether the Supreme Court would also want to adopt some such measures to avoid people having final hearing of matters where they've been languishing for years together, and it's a civil dispute where again all the record is complete. It's just a matter of 2 points or 3 points of law. Parties can be told in advance that we want to hear arguments on this, give us your written submissions, and short virtual hearing, and then resort for orders. So maybe if we started at that end and saw how it worked in practice, maybe then you could think of developing it on a larger scale.
Only one point I want to add on that, Janak bhai, just that immediately after the court reopens.
Hiren, sorry, can we have Amit bhai quickly fill in on that?
Sorry.
Just a minute, I want to add that something like a hearing before a Protho notary. Every day there are 60 to 70 lawyers who stand outside the Protho notary's office for minor directions, extension of time, etc. I think something like that can be implemented on reopening. And that will be a good beginning. It will also be a mindset changer.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea.
In fact, even if we look at the criminal process, and I think there are many areas where even in the criminal law and the criminal process, this can be started immediately. I mean, just take the early stages when a case is initiated before a court. So a complainant comes to the court, he files his complaint, his verification statement is to be recorded. This is all ex parte. All this can actually be done through a virtual process, serving of summonses, appearances, all this can, so even up to the stage where evidence action begins. There are a lot of initial preliminary stages in the process, all of which can actually be dealt with through this virtual court process, because it's all case management to some extent. You might get to a stage, I even believe that some bail applications can really be dealt with through a virtual court. You don't really need to have an open court even on some of the bail applications. Then you have arguments on framing of charge, which also probably can be done through this process. It's only the real implications are when all these other trial actions actually begin, that we have far more complicated issues that need to be actually dealt with. So I think there's scope even within the criminal law process where at the initial stages, a lot of issues can be dealt with through a virtual process, and it saves a lot of time in the criminal justice delivery system. Because I can see on a daily basis the amount of judicial time that is spent on these very basic procedures, because unlike the High Court, where a lot of the procedural aspects are dealt with by the registrar, judicial, or by the protonotary, in the trial courts, it's all actually dealt with the magistrate. So it is his judicial time, which should have been spent actually on conducting trials and hearing final arguments and delivering judgments, is spent on a lot of these procedural aspects. So those can actually be dealt with through this process of technology and virtual courts.
Sharan, I know you want to come in very briefly.
Yeah, very quickly. Just to go back to an earlier point of the discussion, in case I didn't make myself clear, I thought I was clear that in a post-pandemic situation, when you're dealing with virtual courts as a permanent feature, the bigger concern is that if you're going to have restrictions on public access at that stage in a virtual hearing, and I think we've already covered that ground, and why it's necessary to have some element of public access even to those hearings. But of course, as Amit Bhai says, that depending upon the sensitivity of matters, one can take a somewhat more individual approach. But coming to starting small, yes, everyone has given suggestions. I also have in my mind suggestions of how we can start small, but I only wanted to mention one or two statistics that I have, which may help in understanding how we can or whether we can proceed, which is that I'm told that the High Court has already started scanning a large part of the physical record, and between 2015 and 16, as many as 14.5 lakh pages of record have been scanned. I'm sure that more has happened post 2016 in the last 2.5 years. And that's encouraging because it means that even older matters can potentially move onto a virtual platform. And also when we look at again, to make the point that a virtual platform can never be a complete solution, it's important to remember one more statistic or detail, which is that we have about 2.67 lakhs cases pending in the Bombay High Court, of which that's all benches, about 1.6 lakh are civil, and criminal much less, about 31,000 and odd. But we all know as practitioners that a large majority of those cases, when they come to a later and a more advanced stage, a lot of the steam is taken out of those cases. They're clearly less contentious, even at a later stage in the proceedings. I know it's time consuming, but if one can sift through and really apply their mind, I think that we can move a bunch of these onto a virtual platform, and that will also free up the administration from something as menial as physical movement of papers, which I can imagine is so time consuming and requires a huge amount of manpower, something which is unbelievable in today's day and age.
Thank you, Sharan. We really are running out of time. I'm sorry we did start late, but I think we've closed reasonably well, even with the technology. We had Sharan come back. We have, I think, a lot of questions coming in from the audience, but we really are very sorry. We won't be able to take those questions now. But one question I think which I just can't ignore is with work from home now becoming virtually the new normal. The question is, do we have a future where we will have litigation from home, or for that matter from chambers? We'll just take maybe 20 seconds from each of you on this. Janak Bhai, do you want to go first?
No, I've already said what I had to. Let Sharan start.
You know, Kinshuk, I frankly, I'm in mortal fear of this pandemic, meaning that we're not going to be back in court. The truth is, I miss it immensely. I miss it every day. And I miss the crowds. I miss the chaos. I mean, I'm still not used to this new normal. But I'll also say this, that if we can't go back to that situation, God knows how much of the learning that we have had in this profession is going to be lost. Because we've learned so much sitting physically besides, for me, sitting besides every one of my other co-panelists and several other lawyers who are either attending or not attending, by observing in the second and third row. And that's something which is going to be entirely lost to our profession. We are very dependent on oral advocacy. So much of what we've learned about advocacy and about law is our physical presence in court, either as juniors in a matter or arguing in the matter and feeling the pressure of prying eyes looking at you. You learn how to deal with pressure, or by just being an observer in the second and third row and wondering to yourself, what would you have done in a difficult situation? And I'm horrified at the thought that we would lose that entire component of our learning and of our profession. But I hope it's not going to be the case. I want to be optimistic that one day we will all be back in court in large numbers.
Thank you, Sharan. Last concluding thoughts, Biren, Amit Bhai.
Just on what Sharan said, the advantage of a virtual court is you can wear your jacket and tie over shorts and argue a matter. But as Sharan rightly said, that you do miss the excitement of the physical presence in court. And I also wonder how counsel will run between courtrooms on a virtual court. That will again become a great practical difficulty. Janak Bhai, Amit Bhai, how will you run between different courts and argue matters?
That was
a
not
huge-
the question asked, Biren.
So there are issues, and also one point which I feel very strongly is, in a lot of matters there is a great deal of human element which you can appeal to the heart of a judge, which can be done only in physical presence. You look into the eye of a judge, you appeal to the sensitivity of a judge, you appeal to the heart of a judge, and that surely cannot be done virtually. Those are aspects which you will miss if you argue virtually. But yes, these are all things which can be resolved over a period of time. It's a different high when a judge is glaring down at you from the dais, is hostile and angry, and then you can bring him around and win that case. That's a different high altogether. All that aspects will be missing in a virtual court, but I'm sure that we'll have a balance of both.
Amit Bhai.
He's muted.
Amit Bhai, you're on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
On a more lighter note, after having spent many more years in these courtrooms than Sharan and Biren has spent, I think somebody like me is learning the concept of work-life balance sitting at home, because we otherwise spent our entire life. The way we trained ourselves, the value systems, we just kept looking at our briefs, working on preparation of trials, cross-examination of witnesses, 12 hours, 14 hours, 18 hours. And we now know how to even run a little household these days, because that's something that we didn't know. And we really appreciate what the rest of the family is now been doing behind our back. So, of course, what Biren and Sharan have said, that the excitement of the courtroom, there is no substitute to it. There is absolutely no substitute to that excitement, where you have all the players around, you are watching their demeanor, you're watching their changes, you're seeing your opponent, you're seeing here all that you see is you see our faces, you don't see the rest of the body. You're going to be able to see how they clench their hands and fists as the arguments are coming around, and a whole host of different kind of gestures that you miss out. The courts and the judges and their sort of quiet conversations that take place, how we try and read between the lines as to what's happening. We always try and hope that the judges have understood the arguments that we've actually canvassed. If not, then we have the ability to repeat them, because we may believe that a lot of this is all lost. And I'll say one other thing, that in this virtual court we talked about this side of the bar and the technology. But I think the judges also need to do a lot, because it's very easy for us to say we'll file written submissions. But we often come back and say that the written submissions are not read or not appreciated with all the effort that is being put in. So I think it is about both the bar and the bench, which will have to work together to make this entire process very effective. But you're right. Being in a courtroom, cross-examining a witness with a witness standing in the witness box about 5 feet or 8 feet away from you and asking a set of questions is very different from you're seeing somebody with a little blank wall at the back, and I don't know what else is going on in that courtroom. I think the fun is lost. So I would hope and pray that we are all back in the courtroom. It's all very exciting to talk about technology and all this, but I think we're probably part too much of the old school to sort of live with this new technology. It's too bland, I think, sometimes.
Amit Bhai, I don't expect Janak Bhai to debate this too much, but we'll still hear from him.
But I just wanted to add one thing, that we lost Ashok Bhai the other day. And whilst Sharan and Viren and Amit were talking about histrionics in court and, being in front of a judge, and there's no better pleasure or high than the cut and thrust of battle in court. I wonder if Ashok Bhai were on this panel, whether he would feel so good about arguing before virtual courts, because his forte was reading the minds of judges. So I thought I'll end that on that lighter note.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
Thank you so much. And I think the general consensus seems to be that there is a need, but implementation is a huge, huge task. But at the same time, I think one point on which we all agreed is we can start small and maybe we should start small. Sir, all of you, as much as I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in person, it was really a pleasure interacting with you virtually. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. We are really sorry we couldn't take your questions. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Kinshuk,
Thank you.
and thank you.